£50,000. That is the ceiling. That is what a man who kicks a ball in front of millions is legally allowed to make in a year. No more. Not a penny higher. Just gone. Bye-bye. Let me take you back to a time when football wasn't a billion-dollar playground for billionaires and state-backed funds, but a gritty, working-class factory job disguised as a sport. And at the absolute center of it, pulling the strings, rewriting the rules, and making enemies on an industrial scale, was one man, Jimmy Hill. You think modern football has drama? You think player power, TV rights battles, and boardroom greed were invented yesterday? Think again. Jimmy Hill invented the blueprint. But before he became the polished, silver-haired face of British broadcasting, he was the most hated man in the English game. And today, we are going to look at the exact players, managers, and figures who played him dirty, name by name, detail by detail. Let's rewind. Jimmy Hill wasn't your average footballer from the post-war era. He went to a grammar school. He spoke clearly, thought strategically, and possessed an ego the size of the Wembley Arch. While his peers were content with taking orders from penny-pinching club chairmen who treated players like rented mules, Hill saw the system for what it actually was, a cartel. Let's look at the numbers. In the 1950s and early 1960s, the maximum wage in English football was £20 a week. Let me repeat that. The absolute peak earning potential for a top-flight professional athlete was 20 quid. Meanwhile, club directors were pocketing gate receipts, expanding stadiums, and laughing all the way to the bank. Hill didn't just complain about it. He organized. As the chairman of the Professional Footballers Association, he orchestrated the ultimate strike threat in 1961. He looked the establishment dead in the eye and said, "Pay us what we're worth, or the game stops." The chairman panicked. The Football League scrambled. And just like that, the maximum wage was history. Boom. Done. To be fair for a second, and let me give credit where credit is due, this single act changed the financial trajectory of every single player who ever laced up a pair of boots. Without Jimmy Hill, there is no Premier League wealth. There are no multi-million-pound weekly wages. He cracked the vault open. But here is where the story takes a darker turn. Because once Hill tasted power, he never wanted to give it back. He transitioned from player to manager at Coventry City, turning them into the Sky Blues, with sky blue kits, electronic scoreboards, and pre-match entertainment. He wanted to run the whole show. And when he moved into television with BBC's Match of the Day, he didn't just report on the game, he weaponized the medium. He invented the pundit panel. He introduced replay analysis. He made himself the ultimate authority on whether a tackle was fair or a referee was blind. And that is where the personal feuds began. Because when you spend decades telling the entire nation who is right and who is wrong, people start keeping score. Let's break down the list, starting with number 1. Des Lynam. As the anchor of BBC Sports Broadcasting, Lynam was the smoothest man in the business. On the surface, it was all polished smiles and gentlemanly nods in the studio. But behind the scenes, there was a silent, brutal turf war for alpha status. Hill desperately wanted to be perceived as the intellectual heavyweight, the tactical guru, the undisputed voice of authority. Lynam didn't have to try, his effortless, laid-back charm naturally eclipsed Hill's relentless, high-octane self-promotion. Hill simply couldn't stand being upstaged without raising a sweat. Whenever Lynam casually tossed a witty remark that completely neutralized Hill's prepared lecture, you could see the tension choke the air in the studio. Number 2 on the hit list, Ron Atkinson. Big Ron. Flashy, loud, decked out in heavy gold chains and impeccably tailored sharp suits. Atkinson represented everything Hill supposedly stood against in terms of media decorum, yet they shared the exact same astronomical ego. When Big Ron was in the dugout or working the microphone, he treated Hill's academic tactical lectures like background noise. Hill hated being ignored, and Atkinson loved stealing the spotlight. Their clashes weren't just about football, they were ego wars fought in front of millions of viewers, where Atkinson's swagger constantly poked holes in Hill's self-righteous image. Number 3, Stan Bowles. The ultimate maverick. A genius on the pitch, a total disaster off it, gambling away every penny he ever earned and treating team rules like a joke. Hill, the grammar school boy who loved corporate respectability, structure, and professional discipline, looked at Bowles and saw everything wrong with football's traditional working-class culture. Bowles, in return, thought Hill was a pompous, interfering hypocrite who wore way too much makeup for the television cameras. Whenever Bowles was interviewed by Hill after a match, you could slice the animosity with a rusty stud. Bowles would give monosyllabic, dismissive answers just to watch Hill squirm live on air. Let's turn up the heat. Because as Hill's media empire grew, so did the list of people who realized he wasn't just a harmless TV pundit. He was an institutional player. He sat on the FA committees. He influenced rule changes. He shaped public opinion before social media even existed. If Hill criticized a player or a manager on Saturday night, millions of fans repeated it on Monday morning. That is dangerous, unchecked power. Number 4, George Best. The tragic, untouchable genius of Manchester United. Best didn't just break records on the pitch, he broke every social rule the establishment tried to write. Hill tried to play the concerned, paternal mentor to Best on television, offering public advice while simultaneously dissecting his personal life for ratings. Best saw right through the performance. To Best, Hill was the ultimate establishment mouthpiece, a man who wore a crisp suit and talked about morals while cashing checks off the misery and brilliance of working-class boys. When Best brushed Hill off with cold indifference in interviews, it wasn't just awkward television. It was class warfare disguised as banter. Now, you talk about hard men. Souness didn't take prisoners as a player, and he certainly didn't take them as a manager or pundit. When Souness locked horns with Hill, it wasn't a war of words, it was a collision of pure, unadulterated arrogance. Souness viewed Hill's tactical analysis as academic nonsense spoken by a man who didn't understand the modern, brutal reality of winning. Whenever they sat on the same studio panel, you could see the absolute disdain in Souness' eyes. Hill would drone on about the philosophy of the game, and Souness would look like he wanted to tackle him straight through the coffee table. Number 6, Keith Birkinshaw. Remember what Hill did at Coventry? He tried to micromanage everything. But when he crossed paths with managers actually winning trophies, the mask slipped. Birkinshaw built the brilliant, free-flowing Tottenham side of the early 1980s. Did Hill praise the work? Sometimes. But he always had to insert himself into the narrative, suggesting how it could be better, how the club should market itself, how the commercial brand could grow. Birkinshaw didn't want a marketing lesson from a television personality. He wanted respect for his squad. Hill gave him condescending critique instead, treating a master tactician like an employee who needed coaching. Number 7, the entire city of Sunderland. Let's talk about the 1977 relegation battle. The stakes were astronomical. Hill, sitting comfortably in his London TV chair, was accused by fans, players, and local journalists of framing narratives that directly influenced refereeing decisions and league pressure. To this day, supporters in the North-East look at Hill's media coverage of that era as a deliberate campaign against provincial clubs in favor of the capital-centric elite. Was it an actual conspiracy? Or was it just media bias driven by ratings and sensationalism? Follow the money, and you find that drama sells. And Hill knew drama better than anyone alive. Number 8, Sir Alex Ferguson. You think Ferguson hated journalists? Imagine a journalist who used to be a player, used to be a union leader, used to be a manager, and thought he knew more about Manchester United than Ferguson did. Ferguson famously banned and iced out media figures who crossed the line, and Hill tested that boundary constantly. Hill wanted to analyze Ferguson's psychological mind games on live television, treating the greatest manager in history like a lab rat in an experiment. Ferguson didn't bite, he simply cut him out entirely. Because when you are Alex Ferguson, you don't need Jimmy Hill's validation. You make your own reality. We are reaching the summit. The most explosive, career-defining feuds of them all. Number 9, Scotland and David Narey. 1982 World Cup. Brazil vs Scotland. David Narey scores one of the greatest goals in World Cup history, a thunderous, unbelievable rocket past goalkeeper Walter Perez from miles out. Millions of Scots are celebrating wildly across the globe. And what does Jimmy Hill say live on air on BBC television? Well, it was a toe poke, really. A toe poke. Against Brazil. On the global stage. The entire nation of Scotland lost its collective mind. It instantly became a national insult, a permanent scar in Anglo-Scottish football relations. Bars emptied, petitions were demanded, and hatred for Hill reached fever pitch north of the border. To this day, if you walk into a pub in Glasgow and mention Jimmy Hill, someone will bring up the toe poke. Why did he say it? Was it English arrogance? Was it just a clumsy, tone-deaf attempt at live broadcast banter? It didn't matter. The damage was done. Hill had managed to unite an entire country in pure, unadulterated hatred for a single sentence. And finally, number 10. The heavyweight champion of football feuds. Brian Clough. There was never going to be enough room in English football for both Jimmy Hill and Brian Clough. They were two suns in the same solar system, and they were destined to collide in a spectacular fireball. Cloughy represented raw, unfiltered genius mixed with deep-seated insecurity and a tongue sharper than a razor. Hill represented corporate polish, institutional power, and unshakable self-righteousness. Clough saw right through Hill's TV persona. He knew Hill wanted to run the game from the inside while pretending to be an objective observer. Whenever Clough was interviewed by Hill, it wasn't an interview, it was a duel to the death with verbal switchblades. Clough would drop subtle, devastating insults about Hill's hair, his career, his committees, and his ego, all while smiling sweetly into the camera. Hill would try to maintain his professional broadcaster composure, but you could see the steam coming out of his ears. Cloughy didn't just play Hill dirty. He exposed him. He treated Hill like the corporate suit he had become, stripping away the heroics of the 1961 strike and reducing him to a television executive chasing ratings. And that brings us to the ultimate verdict. Was Jimmy Hill a hero or a villain? Let me be fair for a second. Without Jimmy Hill, modern football does not exist. He broke the maximum wage. He revolutionized broadcasting. He brought color, entertainment, and tactical analysis into our living rooms. He fought for the players when nobody else had the spine to do it. But look at the wreckage he left behind. The broken relationships. The bruised egos. The constant need to be the smartest man in the room. He went from being a working-class revolutionary to an institutional fixture, the very establishment he once fought against. He modernized the game, but he turned it into a product. Now, the man who shaped modern football is gone. But the game we watch today, hyper-commercialized, media-obsessed, full of massive egos and boardroom politics, is entirely built in his image. What is your take? Was Jimmy Hill a visionary pioneer who sacrificed his friendships for the greater good of the game, or was he an arrogant narcissist who made football all about himself? Drop your verdict in the comments. I read every single one. A like genuinely helps the channel more than you would think. And subscribe if you want more deep dives into the dark history of football, because trust me, this is only the beginning. Football at this scale is never just a tournament. It's a moment in time. I'll see you in the next one.